Emily and I just played Maps of Misterra. This is a new one from Sit Down Games, and this is I hesitate to even call it a tile-laying game.
It's definitely a tile-laying game.
Yes.
You're going to look at it and say, like, yes, this is a tile-laying game. What you're doing is you're laying tiles.
But
it doesn't feel like that,
in fact,
though.
it doesn't feel, I would go so far as to say you've probably never played a game that feels just like this because it has an interesting sort of two-step process. It feels like a very multi-step process in terms of trying to get these tiles placed out into the main board to sort of hopefully match up with the cards, the sketch cards that you're playing on your own personal board. We are cartographers in this game, and we're trying to map Misterra. At the beginning of the game, it's not going to start with any of these tiles save a few forests, depending on player count. And then, on your turn, each day, you're going to effectively take 2 turns at once. Like, I'll take 2 turns, Emily will take 2 turns back and forth. That turn that you take is made up of a optional move your cartographer. Then you're going to select one of these map or sketch cards, and we don't have them out around the board, but the sketch cards look like this. They're these little like long cards that represent 2 spaces side by side on the main board, but also on your chart that you're mapping. And then you can either discard that to claim a space on the board, but
where you're sitting.
Yeah, where you're standing. Or more often than not, you're going to add it to your sort of chart, and then that will affect what's out here. And it's a really interesting 2-step process.
There's a lot of push and pull, though, too, right?
Yeah.
So I'm doing this twice. And so when I put something out, the first time I put something out, I'm going to put it there, and it's going to become hazy. So I can see that it's like a hazy lagoon, and it's a hazy forest.
But we're not sure yet.
We're not sure yet. We've sketched it out. We think that's maybe what it is. It's not going to actually become those sides until we find another one and put it on there and have the same things. Sometimes things can also change back and forth, right? So if I put something here and now this wasn't confirmed, the hazy goes from a hazy blue to maybe a hazy green. And we keep going back and forth. David and I can even look at the same spaces and be like, oh, I thought this was a desert. And David goes, nope, actually, I think it's a mountain. It never gets confirmed until twice in a row we put the same thing on it.
Right, and in a row, by that we mean if it's the same space that has the same sketch card added, not one after the other, but with just nothing in between.
Yeah.
I could place a card on my board and affect the main board, and then many turns later, if no one's done anything else on those same spots, any player at the table could interact with those spots on their board to change it. So there's effectively 3 states that these tiles can be on. But you're going to, if it's an empty space and you place a card on your board, you're going to add one of the hazy side up tiles to that space. If you add a card to your board and that space already has a hazy side, one of a couple things could happen. If it's the same type of terrain, you'll flip it over and confirm it. Once it's confirmed, that's
good.
it. It's staying out there. No one's going to change it. But if it's a different terrain that you've placed where there's hazy, you actually remove that and replace it with the new one. So there's, like Emily said, a lot of push and pull, a lot of back and forth, because people are out here trying to do things with the terrain based on some presumption cards they have. You can score there. There's some basic scoring where you're trying to get all of the terrain here to effectively match up with the terrain that you have. Spoiler alert, no way is that happening. I mean, you're going to get some, but I can't imagine getting all of those. And then you're also trying to do some things on your board. And
Plus, also, each of the different terrain
Yes.
types have different powers. So
Yeah.
when you move onto something, you can only move one space. But these different terrain types have different powers of, like, when you go onto the yellow, the steps, you can actually go further away. Or if you go to the lagoon, you can discard one of your options and get a new option. So you have different things that you're like, actually, maybe my presumption card is making me hope that it's a forest, but I'm hoping that it's a mountain so I could see further. But also on my board, I had it there as a lagoon. Where do I go?
Yeah, there's a lot going on. And we'd mentioned, too, claiming earlier. If you don't want to add a sketch card to your board, you can, in your space, say I'm going to claim. You have 3 claim tokens. There's a few rules for doing that. You can't claim the same type of terrain more than once.
Yep.
But you're going to claim, and this is this token right here. So for example, if I'd claimed this earlier and I was right here, this is going to give you an example of a few things. Like Emily just said, when I move, I could move 1 normally. But that power for the steep is what they call it, but it's this deserty area, is that you can move again. So I could move there, I'm in steep, it triggers when I move into it, triggers when I move into it, triggers when I move into it. I could get all the way to this space right here. And you'd want to do that if you wanted to affect these spaces on your turn. Then I could take a card like this, which is 2 deserts, because I really want to make this whole thing desert so that I can get more points at the end of the game. And I could add it to my board right there in the corresponding space. And then these 2 tiles, since they're water and forest, would go away, or back to the general supply rather. And then I'd have the 2 deserts still on hazy side.
Yeah.
But that's just my first turn. On my second turn, I could go there and then do another thing, hopefully, if I had
there's enough desert.
If I had another sketch card and lay it right there to confirm those and have them flip.
On the other side, if you leave them just like that and it's my turn, I'm going to make sure that those can move to something else because I don't want to give you any more points. For example, also, you can claim territories, and if the territories ever start to merge together, we did that in our game.
Yeah, the forests, as you can see here, and
So
they weren't worth anything.
Now
for
they're not
either
worth
of us.
anything. So David had a very large area, and when I knew mine was going to be much smaller, I was like, fine, we're connecting it all. Nobody gets any points.
But that dynamic that exists between your chart and the main board is a really interesting one because it can feel like it gets confusing at first, but all you need to know is on your turn, whatever you do on here has to update this board. But over the course of the game, because there's multiple players, by the time it gets back to you, this board won't always match this board, and you've got to kind of get that in your head and go, wait, what's wrong here? This is different.
Yeah, if you're just looking at your own personal map, you're not looking at what's actually happening out here and what your cartographer is actually dealing with as far as terrain.
Yeah, and the push and pull doesn't only end with the player push and pull, but also just in your own head, because there's some basic scoring that gives you points depending on how well you match the board and your chart. And then there's some presumption cards, which we haven't looked through all of them. Some of them may synergize with that, but my suspicion is all of them don't.
Yeah.
Because the ones we had don't. The ones we had are going to give you points for whatever you're doing on your board. I wanted a bunch of mountains in large areas if possible. And then this one wanted the largest section of one type of terrain. Whichever was my largest, I was going to score points. But again, I had to get at least 8 to get any points here, and up to 15 to maximize this. And as you can imagine, getting 15 of one terrain in one area is likely not going to match what's going on out here.
Yeah.
So there's that push and pull of like, oh, do I forget that scoring?
Yeah.
Or do I go to this? Or vice versa? And I gotta tell you, when we played, I went back and forth on that
And
myself.
then you're probably losing out points that way. Yeah, I had one where it was the column, you want it to be all the same type, which is very difficult. We started with 3 different forests and 3 different columns, and I was like, well, how the heck are we going to do this? But then I remembered this scores basically only on my own map.
Yeah.
So the presumptions, I just need to make sure on mine that something's the same. But as you'll see, I ended up with nothing of the columns being the same because I ended up just saying, never mind that. I'm just going to try to be right with what I'm actually cartographing, and so that ended up better for me.
Yeah, it ends up being a pretty thinky situation. I think it probably will feel a little less so upon future plays, but you really do have to remember, oh, I want a bunch of mountains. Yeah, but on that card, I want a bunch of mountains here. It doesn't matter what's going on here.
Yeah.
And I actually got tripped up a couple times wanting to get more and more mountains out here when it really didn't matter. So what we do on Just Played, we talk about who we think the game is for, who we think it's not for. I would say right off the bat who I think it's for. First of all, someone who wants an experience at the table, like we said earlier, that feels pretty different than probably anything. Again, I haven't played all the games in the world, so I might be wrong, but neither of us felt like we'd played anything that did exactly this same sort of thing in terms of this layered process to a tile laying game.
I'll say too that when you explained the game, when I saw the components, I was like, okay, this is a tile laying game like a million others that I've played before, and you kept saying it's going to be so different, and I was like, I don't really see how until we started playing it. And then when I was feeling that push and pull and that like, oh, I want to do this, but I also want to do that, and I also want to stop you from doing this, and I was like, but I only have 2 moves. We said at one point it felt chess-like, right? It felt like, especially because we were going head-to-head, But with more players too, it's going to feel like pretty chaotic,
Yeah.
right? You get 2 moves on your turn, so it's not like you have to do one thing, wait till it comes around. You get to do some pre-planning, but not as much as you're going to want to do. You're going to want to do a bunch of things, and you're going to only get to do 2 before you have to see what everybody else does to mess up the board.
Yeah, and I think what goes hand in hand with that sort of thinkiness is it is a good puzzle game. You're going to constantly feel that puzzle or a couple puzzles tugging at you and thinking, okay, what do I want to do? Do I need to stop anyone? Do I have a moment to breathe so that I can advance something I'm trying to do for me? Is this the right time to do it? Like Emily claimed something early on, and I think in retrospect you thought,
I was like,
maybe
that was
I
such a
wouldn't
bad
claim
choice.
earlier. Because I can tell you, at least in a 2-player game, when someone claims something, like I could claim this area, or she claimed this area, and these 2 were here, but they were hazy.
Yeah.
So all that tells the other players at the table is
Don't
go
let
and
that-
change those before she confirms those, because as you confirm them, it just grows that area for her, which is what I was trying to do here. And these were not there because Emily came here at the end and changed these to something
Yes.
else, so I couldn't grow that area.
I would
It's
also say too, like it's very elegant. It's not super
Yes.
fiddly. It's very easy. It's like your turn is very straightforward on what you're doing, what you're able to do. It's a very easy teach. So it really is all the thinking is in the puzzle of the game. It's not like, oh, and update this tracker and update that and don't forget about this. You're not forgetting rules. You're just trying to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah, and I do want to point something out if we didn't make it clear. The cards that you're laying on your chart, they're 1 by 2. You can lay those on top of one another. You're not
Yes.
laying those just
You
in
have
empty
to.
spaces. You have to lay them on top of each other in order to flip those things. That in and of itself is, I think, the kind of rule or the kind of mechanism that a lot of new players at the table, once they start doing that in the first turn, the second turn,
Yeah.
are going to be like going, oh, okay. That's a different sort of thing. And you're going to leave a lot of empty spaces. One of the other things that's an incentive is you want to try to fill this in because you are going to get negative points for all the empty spaces. There's a few different ways the game can end, and that's also pretty interesting for those players who are looking for, like we said, a tile laying game that it's going to make
Different experience,
a
for
different
sure.
experience that's going to make you think. Now, with that said, who's it not for? I do think, and again, we've only played it at 2-player, but if you don't like the constant feeling of like, oh, I'm going to do this, oh, I guess I'm not going to do that. This tug of war back and forth, it may not be for you because you'll have your sights on, ooh, I want to achieve this out here. And other players are going to affect your ability to do that. Those claim tokens, I don't think are going to be where the big points are scored.
It's going to be really hard because if you're playing in a 4-player game, you have 3 people working against you, right? It's open information. They can see what I have other than these, the game objective cards I'm trying to do. But like, they're seeing what's on my board and they're like, oh, you have a lot of points there? Well, I'm going to mess that up for you. I'm going to mess that up for you. It's not just like take that, but it's also even your own plans. You take 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, and you got to be flexible with what's happening from the other players and what's just coming up as available options. So if you're someone who likes to plan ahead and do exactly one thing that you're planning, you're probably going to get very frustrated by this game very quickly.
Unless you say, forget really what's going on out here and just focus on your presumption cards and trying to do
true.
as much of that as you can on your board. Not to mention, you could also just try to make your board match this as much as possible and really forget about the claim markers entirely. I don't know. I think if someone was able to successfully score some points on here and really match things up pretty well, I don't think you'd feel like you lost out significantly on the claims. Our claims only ended up being, I got 8 total points from claims, and you got 6 total points from claims.
But we also did a good job of like keeping each other in check.
Yes.
So I do think that this game has a certain level of you have to keep the other players in check. Because if you don't, they could get runaway points. But it's built on the fact that you're all going to be, helping, hurting each other in the map state.
So that is Maps of Misterra. It is one of the most unique tiling experiences we've had in a long time. If you have any questions at all about it, please make them in the comments below. We'll get down there, answer whatever you want to ask. Until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.